Hey folks, welcome back to Witchcraft Fundamentals. This is Lesson 7, Magical Crafting. In our last lesson, we looked at the basics of spellcrafting. And all of those principles are the foundation of everything we're going to do moving forward. This lesson is all about taking things up to the next level, the next step in spellwork. And that is actually crafting magical objects or kind of magical components on your own. So we're going to talk about charm bags first. Now, this is another one of those places where terminology is super problematic. You're going to hear things like mojo bags, amulets, talismans, gree-gree, all kinds of fun terms that sound super spooky. I use the term charm bag for a lot of these things because a lot of those specific things like mojos and gree-gree, those are specific terms used by specific traditions. Unless you are someone working in those traditions and are trained by someone who is allowed to train you in those traditions, maybe don't use their specific terminology. Charm bags. What are they? Charm bag is kind of what it says on the tin. It's a bag, usually small, pocket size, little bag that's got magical stuff in it. Depending on kind of what tradition you're working in, like it could be a bolso, it can be a paquete, it can be, a red cotton flannel bag, hand sewn, with no more than 3, 5, or 7 magical objects in it. Um, can be all kinds of different things. It can literally be like a square of cloth that you put stuff in the middle and then just kind of gather up around and like tie so it makes a little thing. I love using those little cotton muslin tea bags you can buy in the organic section of the grocery store. Because I don't sew. Not my thing. Don't sew. Unless I absolutely have to. Um, but it's a bag of some kind. It can be made out of almost anything. In the hoodoo tradition and in voodoo traditions, it tends to be red cotton flannel. Um, I will oftentimes, if I'm not using one of my little tea bags, I will go to the fabric store and get the fat quarters. It's the piece of cloth, yay big, and you can get them in all kinds of fun colors, sometimes patterns. You can do neat things with them. You can use whatever kind of cloth you want. The bag itself can be as simple or elaborate as you want. I've seen people like take a Sharpie and draw a sigil on the outside of the bag. I've seen people embroider a sigil on the bag. I have once, because I'm a crazy person, I actually spun some yarn from wool and wove it into cloth and sewed it into a bag so that my intention was in absolutely everything. That's a bit extra. You don't need to do that. Um, but depending on, how much you like to craft things, it can be as simple or as elaborate as you want. Um, you can put magical objects in them. In the traditions that I've been taught, it's always an odd number. 3, 5, 7, 9, no more than 13. Um, really, once you get past 13 things in a charm bag, you can't carry it around in your pocket anymore. It becomes too big. Um, but you put objects into this bag that are tuned with your intent, and you can literally carry it around. Um, if you're using some of the older traditions, you're going to like pin it inside your clothes so it's touching your skin to have the maximum kind of energy transference. It's a great way to do magic for other people because you can literally, you make a thing. Sometimes, you can get them to help so that their intention was really in there with you. And then they have a physical thing. So they don't need to have kind of the magical mindset for it to keep working for them. Having a physical thing is a great barrier to suspension of disbelief, which unravels a lot of spells. So yeah, that's a charm bag. And it is an awesome, awesome way of doing very physical, palpable magic. Like I said, with our kind of components lessons, a few lessons back, it doesn't have to be fancy rarefied things. It can literally be a pinch of dirt from your workplace. It can be bits of trees at your bus stop. It doesn't kitchen herbs. It doesn't have to be big, fancy, ooky, spooky bones and things. It can be, but that's for other specialists. Now, charm bags, like most spells, need to have an end date. That's something I didn't talk about in the last lesson, so let me give you a big old caveat. When you do your spell, it needs a time box of when it's going to start and when it's going to end. You don't want magic to just float out in the ether forever. That's how you get poltergeist activity. We'll talk more about magical entities and poltergeists and thought forms the next lesson. Lesson after next. Soon. But when you make a magical object, it's going to have an end to an enchantment. And we're going to talk about enchanting things in a little bit. But so if you make a charm bag, the general rule with charm bags is they keep working until the bag starts to fall apart. Traditionally you're going to hand sew these things. And so it's not, like these tight serger stitches. It's hand sewn stitches, and you carry it around enough by friction. Eventually those stitches are going to come loose. And that's how you know the charm bag is done. Or if you've got like herbs, like dried herbs in your charm bag, over time, just being in your pocket, being in your purse, wherever you've got it, those herbs are going to disintegrate, turn into dust. And at a certain point, when you like smell it, it's going to smell like dust rather than whatever herbs or things you've put in there. That's when you know it's done. And we'll talk about disassembling this in a little bit. We'll talk about disenchanting things because the process is the same. But yeah, magic needs to have a start date and an end date, or it needs to be like super obvious because you don't want energy to just go out into the world and just keep attracting more similar energy, because that's how you get hauntings. Yes, so that brings us to amulets and charms and talismans. These are words that every practitioner uses a little bit differently. It gets very confusing and kind of obnoxious. But basically, more or less, I'm just going to use the word charm because it feels the most neutral to me. Anytime you've got a magical object, it might be something that you've created. It might be something that you've purchased. But say I've made protection charms where I'll get like steel, jewelry wire, and I got some garnet beads and a hematite bead and some smoky quartz beads, and I tied them in little loops so that you could attach them to your keys. And that was a protection charm. As I put it all together, I was putting in I was saying an incantation with my intention of creating protection, blah, blah, blah. And then when the charm broke, that's when the magic was spent. If you have purchase objects, like super common to enchant jewelry, and we'll talk about enchanting in a little bit, or if you buy, purpose-made jewelry from a practitioner, Etsy has all kinds of really cool things. If you're not getting out to, your psychic fairs, your magical craft fairs, your pagan pride days, those kinds of events where those folks are available to you. Or maybe you live someplace where that's just not a thing that happens. Etsy's a great resource. That you might buy an object that is, like a magically crafted statue or piece of jewelry or, whatever, that has a spell attached to it. Those are all different magically crafted objects. I actually, I created a protection charm in a Lego minifig. And I literally put my intention as I constructed the kind of Lego dragon. Works for me. Might not work for you. But I think it's awesome. But it's just any kind of object that you create that you can hold physically that has a magical intention to it. And the energy in there is going to, manifest your magical intention as it just exists in the world. And a lot of your kind of magical altar tools, your magical jewelries. I've actually done things where you enchant clothing to have a very specific function, like that Captain America t-shirt with a Captain America shield. Protection charm. Why not? Put a little sigil on the tag in the back of the shirt in Sharpie. Doesn't have to be super complicated and spooky. Use what you got. Like I said, we're going to talk about enchanting in a minute. But that's the basics, kind of creating magical objects. Like I said, charm bags are by far the easiest because it's very easy to understand how you're layering in your correspondence when you've got specific objects going into the bag with specific correspondences. Very, very simple. When you get into crafting magical charms and things, it's really your imagination is the limit. You can do almost anything. Like I said in the last lesson, I knew a person that would always draw sigils on the soles of their shoes, so that literally every step would kind of empower their magic. I have a tattoo that is a protection charm that is literally embedded in my flesh. Everybody does things a little differently. I have a protection charm in my wedding ring, that kind of thing. You can do all kinds of really cool things with magical objects, be they things that you've created yourself or things that you've purchased, various objects in the world. There is kind of a common consensus that things you make yourself have more thorough, energetic kind of impregnation. Something you buy, you have to kind of cleanse and tune, but something that you make out of your base components, you can put your intention at every single level. Whether it's, I've seen people make scarves that are enchanted, and as they knit or weave or crochet, every single loop gets a bit of magic, and they're very, very potent magical objects that are very easy to create compared to, blacksmithing that requires a lot of very specialized tools, or you might do terrible things. Fire is dangerous. So yeah, that's your basic magical objects. That brings us to magical herbalism, which I alluded to in the last lesson. So herbalism is one of those things that is, you can absolutely go as deep as you want. You can get whole, PhDs in herbalism and herbal medicine and gardening and all that kind of stuff. And there's multiple schools of thought on ways of looking at magical herbs. There's Chinese medicine, there's Ayurveda, there's curanderismo, there's, Native North American beliefs, there's Western holistic healing beliefs. There's all kinds of stuff out there on herbalism and its various flavors. If you are into that, I urge you to seek any of the billion resources that are out there. I will put a list of a couple kind of recommended resources down in our show description. I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's very much the sky is the limit. And yeah, it's super cool and you can do a lot with it. Basic herbalism, safety first. Oh my goodness, people can get in so much trouble with herbalism because plants can be poisonous. They can be skin irritants. They can have contraindications with medication you're taking. You need to be very careful with herbalism. It's one of those, once again, when in doubt, use kitchen herbs because you're not going to poison your family and loved ones. Nature can be extremely poisonous. Look at mushrooms. There's a reason that the death cap mushroom and the angel of death mushroom are named as such. They will kill you very, very quickly. So, one, if you're buying an herb or foraging for an herb, make sure it's the correct herb. Lots of things in nature look like other things in nature. If you're going to buy them, make sure you're getting them from a reputable source. Make sure, you know, you want your herbs to be fresh. Make sure that it's someplace with high turnover and it's got high quality. Um, if you have a local apothecary, apothecaries generally have very high medicinal quality herbs, and they are required to have a certain freshness, and there's usually a pretty decent turnover. You're going to get your best quality herbs at some place that is supplying holistic medicine practitioners. I highly recommend going that route. If you have local practitioners that are wildcrafters, one, make sure they're harvesting things sustainably, because boy howdy, that's important. Um, if you are purchasing herbs from a major retailer, if you can, find out what their harvesting practices are like. You know, there's a huge controversy with a certain online herbal company buying herbs from conflict zones and directly or indirectly supporting some really ethically questionable actions on the part of certain governments. Be careful, because if you're, say you're buying saffron and it's maybe some scary black market saffron coming from a war zone, that energy is going to be in that herb. This is once again why I highly recommend kitchen herbs and stuff that grows on trees near where you live. Because, I mean, it's not going to be genocide bay leaves. Um, not a major problem most of the time, but it is a thing that happens, unfortunately. You don't know how ethically things are grown. You don't know if it's sustainable. You know, the last thing you want is energy of like burning and raping the earth coming into your magic. That's not a great way to connect to your local energies to more holistically and helpfully fuel your practice. It's not a good look. Um, use stuff that is more ethical, please. Um, yeah. So once you've got your herbs that are, you know, magic friendly, um, yes, you can absolutely buy the herbs that come in the packs from your local occult supplier. Just, if you can, find out how they're sourced so that you have a better handle on what kind of energy you're dealing with. So once you've got your herbs, loose herbs and spices are the easiest thing to do. That's when we get back to those charm bags. Put some of that allspice, those bay leaves, they go in the charm bag. That's all you have to do. It's very simple. Half a cinnamon stick goes in the charm bag. They're great. You can also powder them and use them as incense. Once again, check the contraindications for herbs. Some herbs are irritants if they're, turned into ash. Things like cinnamon. Cinnamon can be highly irritating to the skin. So things like cinnamon oil, or if you're going to have cinnamon powder in something that might be touching your skin, you could really have a bad time. Always check these things first. But there's a lot of things you can do with dried herbs that are just loose. Most of it is going to be things like putting it in a bag, putting it on an altar, or powdering it into incense to smolder on either a charcoal or in a fire. And these are things we can do very easily and ethically because they're hopefully kitchen herbs or things that grow on trees around your house. I live in the Pacific Northwest. I have 3 cedars, 4 Doug firs, and a plum tree, 2 cherry trees on my property. I can do a lot of things with pine and cedar and cherry wood. I don't need to go out and buy things because I can go outside to the trees that I tend and have a positive relationship with and use them. Next step up is going to be infusions. An infusion is an herb that is steeped in hot or warm water. You can also do cold infusions. This is basically, think of like cold brew. Most of your teas, herbal tea is not tea. Herbal tea is an infusion. Tea is the Camellia sinensis plant. If it doesn't involve Camellia sinensis, it's not tea. I'm a bit of a tea snob. know your terms. Um, Whatever. But herbs steeped in water are an infusion. You can either, if it's food safe stuff, you can consume it. Things like fresh lemon balm tea is a wonderful, wonderful kind of tonic. And it's great for after you've done spell work and you're recovering energy. It's very cleansing and balancing, and it's mood lifting. It's wonderful. I drink a lot of lemon balm tea for depression. You can do all kinds of great things with infusions. The other thing that I do a lot with infusions is for doing like sacred baths. Now, my house is on septic. I have to be super careful what goes down my drains. So all those beautiful like Instagram pictures of like the bath with like vast quantities of like flowers and glitter and things like that. My pipes can't handle that. So if I'm going to do an herbal bath, what I do is I will get a big old stock pot, put it on my kitchen stove, make basically a super concentrated tea, strain it, compost my herbs, and then I will take that water, put it in a bucket or a couple of jars. My cat's being weird. Cats. And then I will dump the bucket over my head, cupful by cupful, in the bathtub or the shower, whatever, to do my kind of herbal baths, because that's what my pipes want me to do. It's also a great way of doing things if you've got, maybe you're doing sacred baths for someone else. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we can only do this at the very height of summer. But maybe where you live, if the weather is nice, you can actually get like a kiddie pool, like a waiting kiddie pool, and have someone stand in it and literally like bucket like lukewarm herbal infusions over them as part of a cleansing or an energetic attunement. You can do all kinds of really interesting things with it. But once again, make sure that nothing in there is going to be irritating to the skin and that the person doesn't have any allergies, that kind of thing. And of course, once again, anything you're going to consume, make sure it's not either going to trigger an allergy or be a contraindicator to any medications you might be taking. Please, please don't harm yourself for magic. That's super counterproductive. After infusions, you have decoctions. What is a decoction? Well, infusions are for like tender leaves, things like dried mint and chamomile flowers and rose petals. Then you've got things like angelica root and spices and tree barks, if you're going to do like cedar bark to make a decoction. Hardy seeds, barks, roots, these are things you chop up and you have to simmer them in, semi-boiling water for like 20 to 40 minutes to make your kind of herbal liquid, because getting the essential oils and volatile components out of those hardy things is more difficult. It's just another way of extracting essential compounds. Similarly, there are tinctures. Tinctures are the same thing as infusions, except instead of using water, you're going to steep them in alcohol. As chemistry has told us, certain compounds are water soluble, others are alcohol soluble. The other time you're going to use tinctures rather than an infusion is if you need it to last. Infusions and decoctions are in water. Water is not a preservative. Not in this. You can want to use infusions and decoctions within 12 to 24 hours of making them. Sometimes they can last in the fridge a little bit longer, maybe up to 3 days, but for the most part, you want to use them right away. Tinctures, you can steep something in alcohol and it's essentially preserved. You can use it over time. Things like elderberry tincture, you're going to find, Google it, there's a zillion recipes. But it's basically kind of a health tonic. And you take it by the spoonful and you can have that little bottle for a month. And the alcohol will preserve the essential compounds in that tincture. Salves, similarly, are for fat-soluble content. Certain chemicals are drawn out by fats. And if you get a scientifically kind of minded medical herb guide, it's going to tell you whether kind of the essential compounds are fat soluble, alcohol soluble. You can Google all that kind of stuff. Make sure you vet your sources. Don't poison yourself. The other thing you can do with salves is they travel real nice. Big sloshy liquid, not TSA friendly. Salves, however, you can get the little metal tins that you can buy like chapstick in, and you can make magical salves and put them in there, and then you can travel with them, and they're not gonna, get all over your clothes or alert TSA. They're just so easy to travel with. Like I have a protection salve that I make on the regular, and I also give out a lot of times at events. It's just a little tin of essentially beeswax and coconut oil. Beeswax is really just a stabilizer. But it's this wonderful magical ointment, essentially, that you can apply, at the pulse points, the back of the neck, that kind of thing, to do whatever your magical intention is. I've seen folks create salves for like boss bitch energy, which is super fun. But you can actually create like a success and potency kind of salve that you're going to anoint yourself with before you go into a business meeting to help you be a boss bitch. You can do all kinds of cool things with it. And then there's syrups. Syrups, anyone who cooks, you're going to know about simple syrup. It's just a solution of like 50% water to 50% sugar is a simple syrup. If you ever make cocktails, you're probably aware of simple syrup. But you can infuse things into said simple syrup. I have a wonderful syrup that I originally made for a weird cocktail recipe, a craft cocktail, but is now just my magical thing. It's a simple syrup where I've steeped in gentian root and cinnamon sticks. And I put this in my coffee, and it's how I sweeten my coffee now, and it's my boss bitch coffee. Because cinnamon and gentian are both about success and potency and kind of that really strong leadership kind of energy. And so it's a wonderful thing when combined with coffee to wake me up and put me in an effective mindset. I've done events where you have like a tea bar and you have syrups infused, one with roseberry, one with mint, one with lemon balm, and you sweeten your tea with it and absorb the magical effect of the herb. It's a really fun way of just adding a little bit more oomph into what you do. You can do the same thing to make, Italian meringue is something where you put a hot simple syrup into egg whites to make meringue. You can use an infused syrup. Anytime you would use simple syrup, you can use something that's got an herbal infusion, and you can strengthen things. You can infuse things with honey. Use that to, sweeten your oatmeal, to do a sweetening spell. You can do all kinds of really cool things to just add layers of magical energy through herbs and put it into straight consume. You can literally just take a spoonful of syrup to when you need that particular intention, or you can put it into some kind of food. Like one of the things that I learned, I was at the tea festival here in Seattle a few years ago, but it was a workshop where it was tea infused butter, used anywhere you use butter in a lot of baked goods, that kind of cooking things. You can make butter for steaks and things like that. You can put, like rosemary butter. That's great on a steak. It's delicious, but it's also got all kinds of wonderful cleansing and kind of healing properties and protection. And you can craft like a whole meal where all of your food has layers of intention. If you're making a meal for your family, you want to infuse health and prosperity and love into everything. The secret ingredient is love and magic. You can do all kinds of really cool things with herbs in food or just straight. So if it's something that you like, that you're into, I absolutely encourage you to do some more research, find all the different ways that you can use herbs in your life just to kick things up a notch. It's really fun. Recommended resources for herbalism, just because it is something you really, really have to know what the herb is and what its chemical properties are to make sure you don't have a health complication. Please be safe. For magical correspondences, as I've said before, Scott Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs is kind of like the basic go-to for most kind of in the United States and kind of Western magic. Those are your basic starter correspondences. Um, if you want to look at some of the kind of home remedies and things like that you can do with herbs, and you can then add your magical intent to that home remedy to just make that ever so much more effective, Rosemary Gladstar's Herbal Recipes for Vibrant Health. It's a wonderful resource that has all of the kind of basic how to create an infusion, how to create a salve, how to do decoctions with a bunch of recipes for common health needs. I think it's a wonderful resource and it's really, really fun. So yeah, really love that. Um, Here in the Pacific Northwest, there's a wonderful book called The Northwest Herb Lover's Handbook that has all kinds of things you can do with herbs that grow here naturally. I don't have to cultivate because I am not a gardener. I am an indoor human, unless I'm out hiking. But I don't have to cultivate that either. I just don't grow things. Um, but you can do all kinds of wonderful things with herbs, and I really, really do recommend get yourself a couple good resources on herbs if you're at all interested in them, and really start exploring. That brings us to enchanting. So enchanting is the process of infusing your magical intention into a physical object that is external to you. Most commonly used for enchanting jewelry, clothing, statues, other objects. Um, and it's really it's how you create an object of power. Um, yeah, it can be anything. It doesn't have to be something that looks magical. In fact, most of the enchanted objects I own don't look magical at all. Because I have to bring them out into the world, and I don't want someone saying, "Ooh, what's that?" and touching it. Much rather have things be ubiquitous that nobody really worries about it. So, if you have an existing object, say you buy an action figure. Say you get a Wonder Woman action figure or a Funko bobblehead to be kind of a protective object of power, because bobbleheads are things you can keep on your desk at work and people just think you're a nerd, which I am. If you're going to infuse your intent into an existing object, your Funko, maybe a piece of jewelry, whatever, you can do it in a number of ways. You can do that simple, hold it in your hands and just fill it with power. Say your statement of intent, and this energy shall enchant this object for the next, moon cycle, or as long as I hold this job, or whatever. Always have an end date. You can do it by adding hidden sigils to the object. Draw things on with Sharpie. You can actually take a Q-tip and dip it in essential oil and draw the sigil on the object in the essential oil that is eventually going to dry and evaporate and become invisible. Make sure your object is color safe and it's not going to stain in an obvious way, unless that's what you want to have happen. You can do the same kind of thing with a sacred charged water rather than an oil. That's totally fine too. Quick aside on sacred waters. Any water can be made infused with magical intent. The most common thing to do is to either add salt to purify it and make it sacred water, leaving it out under a full moon to make it moon water, gathering rain to make storm water. There's a whole series of practices about making various sacred waters. It is not my specialty. I highly recommend Googling it. But yeah, you can enchant things with sacred waters. You can embroider things. You can actually, if you're doing a clothing item, you can add kind of a magical water into your wash water, and you can wash it and use that as a way of enchanting the object. Um, you might want to do that with like hand washing something in your sink rather than running it through your washing machine, though, because you don't want to gum up your washing machine. Be careful. Be mindful. You don't want to add chemicals where they don't belong. And salt is a solvent. Um, if you are creating an object, as I was talking about earlier, you can actually infuse things with every step of the process of creating an object. You know, something where you're like knitting, where you're physically like creating the object. You can literally every movement add your intention and lock energy into your physical object. You know, or it's something like Legos, where it's just the act of constructing it, is putting it all in there. I like it a lot. You can do things like as you design an object, you can make sure the color has the right correspondence, the materials have the right resonance. You can fully like cleanse and enchant your components of an object, like leaving them out under the full moon before you create it. On the eve of the full moon. You can do all kinds of things with it. It's really cool. Use different materials, add, all kinds of construction. Basically, any type of crafting you can do, you can make magical crafting, and it will just add more energy to what you're doing. Of course, when you are done, you must disenchant and dispose of your object. You don't ever want to just create a spell and let it go off into the wild with no end date. That's how you get thought forms and poltergeists and portals and bad things. Energy, as we talked about previously, there's the idea that like energy attracts like energy. So if you send out, say, a protection spell, and you have no end date on it, go and protect, my daughter. Sounds like a spell somebody might do. If you don't have any kind of end date, maybe you're a super potent practitioner and your daughter lives for 40 years and then passes away and you're maybe long dead at this point. That energy doesn't... What happens to that energy? When the spell is... There's nothing else it can do. Well, if you don't have any kind of end, that energy is going to go feral. Whether it's energy that will then latch on to similar energy until it becomes a sentient bit of energy, just growing and growing and growing, which is a thought form, which I'll talk about in a couple of lessons. Or energy can like coalesce into a space, and if enough energy just keeps growing and growing and growing in a particular location, it can alter those energies in that location to the point where it creates a portal and allows things from other planes of existence to come freely when they really shouldn't be here. Always, always, always have an end date for any magical working you do, particularly magical objects, because that's how you get cursed objects without intending it. Now, if you're making a cursed object because you're meaning to, that's a whole different thing, and that's the last lesson. But for the most part, I hope you're not intending to do such things. So if I'm going to enchant a protective object, I might say, and this object shall serve as protection from negative energies for as long as it is in my possession. So that if I lose it, if I give it away, if I pass away, and it's obviously therefore no longer mine, the spell will ground. And you do want to specify upon the end, the energies shall ground to be neutralized. Energies don't just... Law of conservation of energy. It's got to go somewhere. So we want it to ground when we're done with it. Or you can do things like, and if you're working work with a spirit, and you can... And this spirit shall go and attend to this process until it completes. Or if it fails, naturally. When that happens, the entity is then to return to its natural habitat. There's all kinds of ways of phrasing these things, but you do want to be careful about it. When you're done with the object, you're going to disenchant it, ground that energy, and then you need to deconstruct the object. As you're doing so, any lingering energies you should be grounding as you go. Because that's the way these things work. When you do have that physical object, generally I will always thank it for its work. As I said, energy attracts like energy, and you never have 100% control of energy once it's no longer in your body, essentially. You can't know for certain whether, even if you have done no spirit work whatsoever, the energy of your enchantment might have attracted something that might have decided to kind of help it out. That's cool, hopefully. So you always thank the energies for helping you out, just in case. And because it's just the right thing to do. Because when something helps us, we should be grateful for that. So you hold the object, you thank it for its work, and then you ground the energies, you take it all apart. Anything that, if you have pieces that are like burnable, you generally do want to burn or bury or throw in running water. Any type of object that has had magic running through it that is no longer to be used again, because it will neutralize and ground the energy. It's very, very common to bury spell components or throw them in running water or the ocean when you're done with them, to make sure that it is 100% neutralized and nothing unintended is going to happen. Now, of course, that is with the caveat, if something is toxic, don't put it into the earth. Things like lead. Don't poison things. Don't salt the earth. We are stewards of the land now. We have to take care of it. If you're using components that are toxic, if they go into the land, they should not go into the land. They should be disposed of in the safe and mindful way that is most appropriate to that object. If you are doing spell work with things that are toxic, if they go into the land, perhaps you might choose another method of spell work where it isn't toxic. Once again, kitchen herbs are amazing because they're safe. If you have pieces you want to reuse, a lot of spell components can be reused if they're used in benign spell work. Say I'm doing a luck spell and I'm using a quartz crystal in a charm bag. I can take that quartz crystal and I can cleanse it and I can reuse it. Things like herbs, salt, oils, obviously, that's not something you can really reuse. That energy is usually spent when you're all done. But physical objects, things like the Legos. If you create a Lego figure and you're done with whatever enchantment you've done, you can disenchant it and you can ground and cleanse those pieces. You can reuse them. If it's not something that is easily biodegradable, see if you can reuse it. The exception to that rule is if you're doing either baneful magics or really, really strong magics. Those kind of energies can permanently sink into a material that might make it unstable for use in other spell work. Some objects have stronger memories than others. Things like a granite rock. Granite tends to hold on to memory in a really particular way. It doesn't cleanse quite as easily as something like a quartz crystal is a great conductor of energy, but it also cleanses really nicely almost all the time. Use your judgment. Do some trial and error. If you cleanse something and it doesn't feel clean, either clean it again or maybe it's time to release that object. Maybe you're burying it. Maybe you're throwing it away very, very mindfully. Be careful with that kind of thing. So yeah, if you're going to create something, you need to dispose of it when it's done its work. complete the cycle. Don't let things just go off into the ether, because then you don't know what they're going to do. And if you're responsible for it, you might get all kinds of fun backlash. Let's not do that. So yeah, that's enchanting. That brings us to altars. Altars are, we talked about it a little bit in the sacred space lesson, but in terms of a working altar or a spell work altar, you can do all kinds of magic with an altar. Altars are amazing if you're doing long-term workings, if you're doing that, a 6-month prosperity spell to reverse ill fortune into great fortune, that kind of stuff. If you're making big changes and you want it to happen over time, instead of constructing your altar, doing step 1, deconstructing your altar, coming back a month later, reconstructing the altar, doing step 2, deconstructing the altar, coming back a month later, repeat, you can create a semi-permanent altar, and you can just do your spell work there at your intervals over time until you've completed it. Shelves are great for this. I've seen people do shoebox dioramas. I've seen people make altars, little mini ones, in Altoid tins. You can do all kinds of things. I've seen altars that are your computer background or your phone lock screen. You can do all kinds of things with it, and it can be very, very simple or very, very complicated art pieces. You can do a whole, Hindu Rangoli kind of thing. The sky's the limit. Whatever you feel like is going to work for you. When I do kind of this type of altar, I have my ancestor altar as a permanent space where I do my devotions to my ancestors in a specific location. And it is a spell kind of working altar because I do spirit work with my ancestors. So it's how I, on a regular basis, give them offerings and communicate with them and that sort of thing. I've seen people do fairy houses that are basically semi-permanent altars to help you set up communication with the fae. You can do all kinds of things with them. It's like I said, sky's the limit. Use your imagination, but it's really all about having something that persists over time. That's where altars are helpful in terms of magical use. Devotional use is a whole different thing, and I talked about that before. So if you didn't watch Lesson 3, which is Sacred Space and Divination, I recommend you go back and watch that. Another type of advanced magic is the ritual magic and ritual theater. We talked a little bit about ritual magic in the last lesson, but there's kind of a next level of ritual magic that is ritual theater. Now, there are groups out there, things like the Eleusinian Mysteries. I may have 100% botched that pronunciation. I don't do Greek. Don't know. But you are literally attending a theatrical performance that isn't in itself a ritual. And your participation as observer energetically is part of the magic of that ritual. Depending on who you are, storytelling magic can be extremely, extremely potent. A skilled storyteller can engage energetically with, their audience in a way that can create magical energies and send them into the world to manifest. It can be very cool. Concerts are almost a form of ritual theater, depending on who the artists are and how intentional they are about certain things. But there's an energetic exchange between audience and performer that can be used ritually to perform magic. It's not something that I personally do. It's not for me. But I know folks that do it and have engaged in it and that love doing it, and it's super powerful for them. So if you are a performer kind of person, if you're a theater kid, maybe look this up. And the last thing to talk about are thought forms. So I mentioned Rogue energies can turn into thought forms. So just a TLDR. What a thought form is a created, semi-sentient or sentient energetic entity. Are they alive? It depends on how you define alive. But energy in the wilds attracts similar energies. So they eventually will come together. Over time, enough of this energy, uninterrupted, undissipated, can create bigger and bigger concentrations of the similar energy. Given enough time and enough energy, it can develop sentience. And then it's just a ball of a specific intentional energy doing its thing in the wild. And a lot of poltergeist hauntings are actually thought forms. Particularly things like historical hauntings. We'll talk more about that in a couple of lessons. But, you know, get your like super, like your Tower of London super famous centuries old hauntings. Most ghosts don't hang out for centuries and centuries. They generally have shit to do. But you tell the same stories over and over and over, and the energy gathers, coalesces, belief becomes a thing, and suddenly you've got a haunting. When practitioners let energy go feral, it can create a thought form. That thought form can then become a wild magical entity that does stuff, and then people like me have to go clean it up. It's not fun. Don't do it. So yeah. There are times when you can actually create thought forms to perform magical tasks. That's a very advanced piece of magic. There are books on that. Stay away from them as a beginner. When you become an advanced practitioner, you can research that for yourself. So, your homework, should you choose to accept it. Create a charm or a charm bag. Create at least one herbal infusion. And create at least one temporary altar. Think about what is the purpose? What are the components and correspondences? How are you going to put the energy into it? How do you feel as you create them? What are you doing when its time has done? What does it feel like to disassemble and ground out those energies? Do the things. Go out. Do the things. Be a practitioner by practicing. But what if you don't need anything? You always need health. You always need prosperity. You always need, healthy relationships. Some way to make a living. We all have these needs at all times. So it doesn't have to be some big woo-woo thing. It can just be, help me to have a good day tomorrow. So yeah, that's magical crafting for you. I hope you found this interesting and informative, and I hope you create some wonderful magical things. See you soon. Bye.